An odd economics debate, which has become somewhat more prominent in finance and political circles, is the debate on a gold standard for currency. Former President Donald Trump, who got bodied in the election by Papa Joe Biden, actually nominated two people who believed in a gold standard to the Federal Reserve, although these nominations both ended up failing. For those of you who are not aware, the United States and most every other developed nation utilizes a fiat currency, or a currency which is not backed by any material or immaterial asset. A fiat currency is backed only by the confidence of people, governments, and business. This idea seems unintuitive and very precarious for many people. If your money isn't actually worth anything, isn't that dangerous? What if people suddenly lose confidence in your currency? These questions aren't illogical or irrational to ask or ponder by any means. I hope to answer them and provide an explanation as to why the current fiat money system makes sense compared to a currency backed by gold or some other asset like Bitcoin or oil. I'll speak most specifically throughout this video about a gold standard, but the principles of this video broadly apply to any currency backed by another asset outside of a currency peg, meaning a currency backed by another currency, which I will address briefly later in this video. In order to analyze this issue, we have to first discuss inflation. After all, the main concern of a currency that is backed only by confidence is inflation, the idea that governments will overprint the currency, causing it to lose all of its value. Famous examples include the Weimar Republic and modern Venezuela. So what is inflation exactly? Inflation is nothing more than prices in an industry, market, or broad economy increasing. If a dozen eggs goes from costing $2 to $2.25, the egg market has experienced an inflation of 12.5%. At the same time, if a dozen eggs goes from costing $2 to $1.75, the egg market has experienced a deflation of 12.5%. Simply put, inflation means prices go up, and deflation means prices go down. Often, people intuitively link the value of money to inflation, leading many to think inflation is simply when money is worth less. Now, this is kind of true, but the full answer is slightly more complex. What actually causes price levels in an economy to change? What causes inflation or deflation? The quantity theory of money can help us answer this question. The quantity theory of money is a simple equation that has a few components. 1, the economy's general price level. 2, the quantity of goods and services in the economy. 3, the amount of money in the economy. And 4, the velocity of money in the economy. In this case, velocity of money is nothing more than how fast the money is circulating throughout the economy. These components form a relationship which, when rearranged, can give us a basic formula for the price level of the economy. Based on this, the price level of an economy is the velocity of money multiplied by the amount of money, and this is divided by the amount of goods and services in the economy. Given this equation, we can see what causes prices to increase, inflation, or decrease, deflation. If the velocity of money or the amount of money in an economy were to increase all else equal, the price level of an economy would need to increase in order to compensate. After all, the people producing all of these goods and services aren't going to want their shelves to be empty in the short run, so they'll have to increase prices in order to ensure a more regular and predictable flow of goods and services. Of course, the opposite is true in economies or markets where the amount of money or the velocity of money decreases. This causes producers to lower their prices because they need to attract customers to their business. They don't want their products and services to sit idle, and they're now competing in an economy with less dollars to go around. At the same time, let's look at the Q in this equation. We can see that if the amount of goods or services in the economy were to increase, the price level would need to decrease all else equal. There's more stuff competing for those dollars in the economy, so prices of the economy need to come down. Keep in mind throughout this, I've used the phrase all else equal. You'll find in economics this phrase does a lot of heavy lifting, and this is because, as with many examples, the equation can actually be very dynamic in the real world. The velocity of money, the amount of money, and the amount of goods and services in the economy do not move in vacuums, so of course these three things are constantly changing and can even feed into each other. To bring this back to the main topic of the video, a gold standard or an asset-backed currency is a currency that can at any time be exchanged with a certain amount of an asset, or at the very least is worth some amount of an asset as guaranteed by the government. Take the US for example. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 resulted in the US government valuing or guaranteeing that 35 US dollars was equal to 1 troy ounce of gold. This can arguably guarantee the value of the currency, but this isn't always a good thing, and it creates issues for the economy. A small side note here is that a very valuable currency isn't always a good thing and often erodes domestic producers' abilities to compete with international firms. If a currency is worth a ton of money relative to others, consumers are incentivized to import their products rather than buy from domestic manufacturers or producers. Watch my video on the Plaza Accord to learn more about exchange markets and currency pegs for a bit of a deeper dive on this issue. Now, in terms of a government's relationship to businesses, often the best thing a government can do to foster a healthy amount of private investment within the economy is to provide stability. If your government is getting into wars left and right, elects a socialist reformer and then a far-right populist, or has a totally inconsistent industrial and trade strategy in general, this can make for a volatile environment, which more often than not causes the economy to be similarly volatile. Volatility is, at the end of the day, often bad for the people on the ground, the factory worker, the salesperson, the school teacher, etc. In any economic system, there will be some amount of volatility, though part of the project of a government should be to reduce this volatility when able without sacrificing the economy's ability to expand. This is where the conversations of inflation and a gold standard collide. A gold standard, or any standard which fixes the value of a currency to a separate asset, can cause a lot of volatility in an economy's price level. Of course, if the amount of money in the economy is by policy tied to a commodity, the amount of money in the economy is much more fixed, as every new unit of currency created must be attached to the creation of the reserve asset, in this case, gold. Of course, in theory, the economy could mine more gold in order to sustainably print additional money in order to finance assorted projects, but this is a much more precarious and difficult process relative to the one we have today, where faith backs a currency and that currency can simply be printed, either literally on paper or figuratively through digital creation. Based on this Bureau of Labor Statistics data, you can see inflation was highly volatile before 1971 when the US officially abandoned the gold standard. Inflation was also especially volatile before 1979 when the current governing authority of the Federal Reserve was adopted, allowing central banks to relatively strictly control the inflation rate. Now, this sounds very unintuitive to the average person. Wouldn't the amount of money in the economy being more fixed cause inflation or the economy's price level to be more stable? Well, no. Going back to the quantity theory of money, the amount of goods and services and the velocity of money can move independently of the amount of money. Meaning when the economy grows, i.e. more stuff gets created, the amount of money cannot move as fluidly. This means deflation is much more common in economies with a gold standard. Now, deflation sounds like a good thing, the idea that prices would decrease. However, having low and stable inflation actually creates more of an incentive to spend and invest than a deflationary state. If businesses can get a risk-free return from simply allowing money to sit in their treasuries because deflation is happening and money sat alone has more purchasing power tomorrow than it does today, the barrier to move forward with an investment becomes much larger, as the urgency to invest decreases substantially. A fundamental assumption in finance and valuation more specifically is the time value of money. The idea is that money today is worth more than money tomorrow, and when this assumption is violated, we see problems with investment in the economy. Now, extended deflationary periods can sometimes mean the economy is experiencing a significant technological shift. If the productive capacity of the economy is shifted outward, i.e. the economy is able to gain a lot of efficiency and produce a lot more stuff, things become cheaper on a macro level because of this aggregate shift. However, since the monetary state cannot technologically shift the entire economy, this type of deflation cannot be artificially injected, meaning the reoccurring deflation and inconsistent price level of an economy caused by a gold standard means at least a more volatile business and economic environment and an aggregate disincentive from investing on a personal and corporate level. Thus, low and stable inflation is the standard goal of the Federal Reserve and most every central bank in the developed world, the key words being low and stable inflation. In review, economies need stability, and a gold standard is a much less reliable way to manage price levels in an economy. The system we have today with central banking and a fiat currency has proven to be both reliable and good at mitigating inflation and deflation risk. Now, this isn't to say that every country should always have a fiat currency. I think some economies have a decent justification for dollarization or utilizing a currency peg, but these are far cries from the outdated and unreliable system of a gold standard. Thanks for watching.